to the original Lord of the Rings trilogy and the original Lord of the Rings books was that she's like, or Sauron, I forget the exact words that he uses, but he promises to make Galadriel queen, and he says, you'll be as strong, as powerful as the sea, you know. And what the scene that reminds me of is when, in the Fellowship of the Ring, when she is tempted to take the ring from Frodo, and she says, I will be as treacherous as the sea, I will shake the foundations of the earth, I'll be, and in place of a dark lord you will have a queen, you know, not terrible but beautiful, stuff like that. And he says very similar lines in that part of the episode, and I was just like, oh, that's so awesome. It's so it's just, you know, linking back to the original trilogy. And I think the last episode 5 and 6, there were also nodes to the Two Towers and the Fellowship. I was hoping that there would be kind of a direct link, a direct quote, or similar quotes for Return of the King. I mentioned in the last video that we had one for Fellowship, we had one for Two Towers. Again, we had one for Fellowship again, but not for Return of the King. That would have been cool, but they didn't. Or not that I noticed. And then they go to this close-up shot, like zoomed in, right? Like it was like this, or like more like this, right? With Celebrimbor, Sauron and Galadriel, and Galadriel's like, I will never serve you, I'll never follow you, or whatever, and he's like, then you will die by my hand, or something like that. Like, just like, oh, like the up close shot, and the ferocity and the rage of both of them. That is just something that I just really enjoy in film and TV that they do, and that was just a great way to just show the gravity of that situation and of that scene. And immediately when he says, you'll die by my hand, she plunges into the water like she was before Halbrand saved her, and she's drowning, and I think she dies in this sequence. And she hears her name being called, and it's Elrond. Elrond pulls her out of the water, and she pulls the dagger on him. And Elrond's like, it's me. And so then she rushes off to Celebrimbor, and she tells Celebrimbor, we need to make 3, not 2. Because 1 will seek to divide, and 2 will be the balance, or something like that. And of course, they don't say what they're making, but I know that they're making the rings because we saw those 3 gemstones previously, and I know that there's 3 rings for the elves that she needs. And she says these need to be made for the elves alone. So then we go back to the stranger. I told you that scene was going to be a lot. Again, the stranger, I'm like 99% sure it's one of the blue wizards. He goes to Rune. Nori goes with the stranger. The stranger says, when in doubt, always follow your nose. Very, very Gandalf vibes in that last scene. I'm guessing that when those 3, I guess I'm going to call them acolytes, you know, they're like the followers. The 3 acolytes kind of helped unveil the stranger and give him a little bit of knowledge back. So I'm suspending my disbelief in that sense. That's why the stranger is able to speak better. He's very clear, and he's starting to become very wise in what he says. There's very Gandalf vibes of that last scene with him, and, you know, and he goes, the hair doesn't smell so foul over there. When in doubt, always follow your nose. That's what it is. It's totally Gandalf. I don't know if it's a good Gandalf impersonation, but so yeah, they're going off to Rune, and I'm like, I get it, Nori's gonna go with them because I don't really see a reason for us to visit the rest of the Harfoots again, because Nori was the main one. She's the iconic, she's the face of the Harfoots, you could say. So it would make sense that we only see the stranger and Nori together, which is fine. My biggest thing with the wizard, the blue wizard, is that there's 2 blue wizards. And if this guy, the stranger, is in fact one of the blue wizards, why would we focus on only one of them? Why not focus on both? And if that's true, if we're going to focus on both, why are we going to see the origin story of one and not the other? So, do I think they're going to introduce the second Blue Wizard? I think they will, but this guy's going to be already established, and maybe he's going to help train the stranger one, or they're both going to be established and meet each other. I don't know. But I think that's a really good way of giving backstory to the two wizards, because Tolkien never really wrote that much about the Blue Wizards. It was mainly about Gandalf, Sauron, and Radagast, mainly of the former two. But anyways, back to Eregion. They melt down Finrod's dagger for the rings because they need silver and gold, that of the Valar, which is Finrod's dagger. So they melt it down, and it's very emotional for Galadriel. It's the last piece that she had of her brother, so it's very emotional and sad. Elrond goes back to the river to find the lineage of the kings of the Southlands, but walks into the forge to see them completing the rings, and so he gets distracted. And the 3 rings finally completed. It was funny. I work in the jewelry industry, so it was funny to see, like, they were like, as they were melting everything, and I'm like, oh, they're casting. And then they were doing, they're like looking at the stones and the metal with like little magnifying glasses. I was like, oh, they're doing QC. And then they put the each stone in the setting of the setting, and then the prongs of the rings. I was like, oh, are they gonna show the setting and closing the prongs? But they didn't. It was funny because, like, I never really think about work outside of, especially not in a show or movie, so it's funny to see that. But we have the 3 rings completed, and it was a cool shot, overhead shot, very similar to the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring, when we see that sequence with the rings being shown, and the forging of the rings a little bit in the prologue in the movies. And if you wanted to know a little bit more about the Rings of Power, since that's the name of the show, I took it upon myself to get some information about the rings. I only remembered off the top of my head one of the rings, and that was Galadriel's ring. But here is information of the 3 rings. The blue ring with the sapphire and gold ring, Vilya. So the blue and the red one, Vilya and Narya, they're both given to Gil-galad. But the blue one, Vilya, is given to Gil-galad, and he's the one who wears it for a long time. And it's said that the blue ring is the most powerful of the rings. They all have their different properties and different powers. The blue ring, I'm forgetting what it is. I didn't write that down. But I remember the other 2. But the blue ring is said to be the most powerful, but I don't think Tolkien wrote as much as he did for the other 2, because the other 2, I believe, have more history. Especially the red one has a lot of history in it that I can remember. But Vilya, again, it's given to Gil-galad along with the red one, Narya. Gil-galad eventually gives that ring to Elrond. The red ring with the ruby and gold is Narya. It was also given to Gil-galad, but he has Círdan, his shipwright, and also his lieutenant and the Lord of Mithland. Mithland or Mithland? I put Mithland. I think it's Mithland. Anyways, gives it to him to wear it. I don't think we've seen him in this show, or maybe I think they referenced him maybe once. I don't remember, like in the first couple episodes. But Gil-galad gives it to him. Then Círdan, when Gandalf arrives in the Third Age, Círdan, in all of his wisdom, sees that Gandalf is the wisest of all the Maiar, and gives Gandalf the ring, which is so awesome. And the red ring, Narya, has the powers, gives the wielder powers of fire and flame, and so that's why Gandalf is able to use fire and also withstand fire when he fights the Balrog of Moria in the Fellowship of the Ring, and moreover, he's able to withstand fire like when he fights Saruman later on, and that's really awesome. I love that. Lastly, the white ring, the diamond ring, and it's all in silver. That is Nenya. That is given to Galadriel, and she is the soul bearer. She's the only one who wears it. I'm interested to see how Gil-galad justifies. Well, they don't give it to Gil-galad. I don't think so in the books. So it'll be interesting to see how they justify it in the show, because Gil-galad doesn't like Galadriel in the show because he's like, you shouldn't even be here. So that'll be interesting how they play that out. But in the books, Nenya is given to Gil-galad. It's the Ring of Adamant. I believe its powers are of healing and of let's say hidiness, concealment. So she's able to stay concealed. That's how Lorien, when she goes to Lothlorien, she's able to conceal their people there for a long time. Anyways, in addition with those 3 rings, as we talked about, or as it was mentioned in the show, that they had to create those rings just for themselves, just for the elves, and without the knowledge of Sauron. But even in that sense, that they were not directly influenced by Sauron, in the sense that he wasn't there making the rings and he wasn't in the room, but they still obtained the knowledge of how to make those rings from Sauron, from what he told them. And so thus, when the One Ring is finally created, those 3 rings are bound to the fate and bound to the fate of the One Ring. So their power is bound to the fate of the One Ring, so they become more powerful, I believe, with the One Ring. And when the One Ring is destroyed, they become less powerful. And so with this whole thing of trying to save the elves, trying to save the light of the Valar, when the One Ring is created, especially, that power is restored in them, that light is restored in them. But when the One Ring fades, we see especially that the ring bearers are having to diminish into the west, and a lot of the elves have to diminish to the west as well, because the light of the Valar leaves anyways. But it's not for nothing, they did it to survive a few thousand more years, a couple thousand more years, I believe, in Middle Earth, which is nice. So that's all I have directly in my notes. But it doesn't mean that's all there is to talk about. The episode ends with Sauron going into Mordor. Halbrand, I don't know what we call him anymore, Halbrand or Sauron. Interesting to see that they chose a man of the Southlands to be the form that Sauron took. In the books, he takes the form as Anatar, the elf, which makes more sense, and that an elf would come into their midst to help them, and they're less suspicious of an elf, whereas Halbrand is a man and he's suspicious and all that stuff. But I think that if, for readers and people of Lord of the Rings knowledge and Tolkien knowledge, that if you had an elf named Anatar on the scene, it would be like, duh, that's Sauron. So it makes sense. I think it's a good creative choice in the sense of not spoiling anything for anyone, because it would have been too easy to detect that Sauron would have been Sauron, or Anatar would have been Sauron. So with Halbrand, we were kind of like, okay, who's this guy gonna be? And people were speculating that from the beginning. Like the second episode, I think, when we saw Halbrand, or yeah, something like that. So I'm glad that they did it that way. I would say that's one of the creative choices that I liked that they changed. And that's how it ended. Again, overall, this episode, I don't say it was disappointing, but I was looking for more, if that makes sense. I think I can say that, or we can all say that in the sense of, I was expecting more, but I wasn't disappointed. I was satisfied, and I enjoyed it to a point, but it didn't live up to the hype that people were saying for the episode, and it didn't live up to my expectations, thinking that this episode was going to be like a big wowzer episode. I think, much to the chagrin of many people who know about Lord of the Rings and the books and everything, the unfinished tales, and all the many, 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 many books that Tolkien wrote, and his son wrote, and his grandson wrote, of all these different books after just Lord of the Rings and after the Silmarillion, I feel like those are the two big ones. that we're focusing on in this show for this show. But much to the chagrin of people like myself who have that knowledge, that it's hard to be fully immersed in this show because we expect a lot of stuff to happen. Not in the sense of like, we expect greatness and we're smug about it. Not in that sense. I think I started out in the beginning, and definitely like a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we knew that this was happening. But in the sense of, okay, Sauron has to reveal himself. One of these guys has to be Sauron. I think the big two is the Stranger or Halbrand, and then Adar. But we learned, 3 episodes ago, or 4 episodes ago, that Adar wasn't Sauron. Or we kind of knew, or it was leaning towards it probably not going to be him. And, which also, I'm surprised we didn't see him at all in episode 8. And it was a long episode, it was like an hour and 21 minutes or something like that. So it makes sense. I don't know. Just make it a longer episode. I want to see more. Like, give me more of the show. Whatever. Stranger Things went crazy with their episodes. They were like, one of them was like 2 hours long. One of the episodes. Just do it. Put more in there. Anyways, yeah, it was just lackluster, I guess. And I was expecting for a battle. We didn't really see any battles in season 1. I guess this will begin my overall, what do you call it? Overall season recap. And I don't know, it's just, I enjoyed the show. 100% enjoyed the show. And I think it's either an awesome thing or it's a really unfortunate thing that the Rings of Power came out at the same time as House of Dragons. It's just, it happened. And ironically, House of Dragons started first, and it's still going on. I think tonight I want to say is tonight the season finale? No, is tonight the season finale? I think they have 10 episodes. Let me see. I thought last week was episode 8. Let's see. House of Dragons, here we go. Episode 9. Okay, episode 9 is tonight. I haven't watched it yet. Today's Sunday. I know they have 10 episodes they're going to do for season 1. But I think there was 2 episodes out of House of Dragons when Rings of Power premiered, and Rings of Power premiered with 3 House of Dragons, and then Rings of Power premiered with 2 episodes. And House of Dragons is still going on. We had 8 episodes of I was right. 2 episodes of House of Dragons came out. Sorry guys, I'm rambling. And then we had the 2 episodes of I was right. 3 and then 2. And because House of Dragons is above by 1 right now with the episode, because they're on episode 9 today, and Rings of Power just ended with episode 8. Yes. And they're going to finish with episode 10. Anyways, it was a very unfortunate thing because you have the colossal, humongous, ginormous, of a beast that Game of Thrones was, the original show when it was out, Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, and then he wrote Lord of the Rings, and it was a huge thing for fantasy in literature. And then the Lord of the Rings came out, that Peter Jackson did over 21 years ago now, and that was huge for fantasy film and fantasy TV. That opened the doors for a lot of stuff, and it made a lot of things possible for the fantasy genre on TV, and it made leaps and bounds for film industry in general and all this different stuff. And then Game of Thrones came out 15 or whatever years after Lord of the Rings did, and that did huge things for the fantasy genre that that Peter Jackson couldn't have done with 3 movies that Game of Thrones did. And that I think Game of Thrones really made it cool to be into fantasy and into that realm of stuff, because before, I remember growing up, like, I mean, I've been a fan of Lord of the Rings since Fellowship came out in 2000, Two Towers came out in '01, and then Return of the King in '02, or I'm getting those maybe late. Maybe it was '01, '02, '03. I can't remember. I was like 5 when those came out. But I remember I got the Fellowship and the Two Towers on extended edition from my brother whenever those came out. So I think 2 years after, at least 2 years after the Two Towers came out, so maybe like '04, '05 at the least is when I got them. And since then I was a fan. And I remember at the least 6th grade being huge into Lord of the Rings, having a bunch of toys. Me and my best friend, since I've known since I was in the 1st grade, we both had a collection of Lord of the Rings toys and a collection of Star Wars toys, and we are the biggest nerds of both of them. And I remember getting made fun of for liking that stuff all the time. And it wasn't to the point of bullying, but it was enough to notice that you would get made fun of for liking Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. But I remember him and I, we didn't care. And people were like, oh, you guys, I remember kids being like, you still like Lord of the Rings, you still like Star Wars, and we were like, yeah, so what? Like, we didn't care. And then years went on, and I remember even being like in high school, and it was still like, you know, it wasn't cool to like any of that stuff. And then college, the same thing. And then Game of Thrones came out, and it was still like, Game of Thrones was such a crazy phenomenon, I remember. And then I think also with the whole, you know, Marvel being huge, and especially like halfway into the Marvel, you know, thing, you know, Marvel started out really, really big with Iron Man 1. But I think it was really like Avengers 1, Avengers Age of Ultron. That was when it was like 2012 time. 12, 13, 14. That was when it was really cool to be a nerd and be into comic books and fantasy and all that stuff. And again, Game of Thrones did a huge thing for the genre. And so with House of Dragons coming out, it's full circle. I'm coming back. Don't worry, guys. I know this is a long video. But House of Dragons coming out, and people are on this hype. They're like, okay, we've known that Game of Thrones is going to do something else in the future. We know House of Dragons is coming out. Then there's this show, the spin-off of Jon Snow's show's coming. So House of Dragons, big thing, big show, and then Rings of Power comes out, and it's like we can't help to compare them. Two big names in fantasy, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. And at the same time, we can't help but compare and contrast these shows. I will say, didn't care for the time jumps in House of Dragons, because I really enjoyed the characters that we started off the show with, and I'm not crazy about the older characters. You know what I'm talking about if you've watched the show. If not, spoilers. But I think I've enjoyed House of Dragons more. But I think it's because I've been able to immerse myself more, and I can just sit back and just relax and watch. Not fully relax because the things are crazy in that show, because I'm always at the edge of my seat. But you know what I mean. There's not an investment for me. Whereas Rings of Power, I'm like, and I've been listening to a lot of podcasts in this past week preparing for the season finale for Rings of Power, and just kind of seeing people's perspectives and what they thought. And one podcast, they talked about that it's just a Lord of the Rings show for the sake of calling it a Lord of the Rings show. That it's just, all they did was make a fantasy show, and they just sprinkled a couple Lord of the Rings names and a couple creatures' names, and it's like, oh, Galadriel, Elrond, I recognize those guys' names. And, oh, elves, dwarves, I recognize those guys' names, those races' names from the Lord of the Rings original trilogy. Okay, I'll watch this. And that's all that they are doing to get people invested into the show. And that was the point of view of these people in the podcast, and I'm inclined to agree with them to a point. But again, I think it goes back to Game of Thrones really creating this huge fandom for fantasy. And I think that came across with when The Witcher came out. That was huge. And then, I was gonna say Wheel of Fortune, House of Wheels, or what was that other Amazon show that flopped? That was based on a book that didn't have as much hype as The Witcher, but it had some hype for it. And there's a couple other shows that came out on Netflix. I'm blanking out on their names, but fantasy for sure is becoming popular, and especially like The Witcher. You know, the books were popular, the games were even more popular, I would say, and then the show was immensely popular. And I really enjoyed The Witcher. And so Rings of Power, it's like, oh, this huge name, Lord of the Rings, and The Hobbit were huge when they came out, that trilogy. Those, especially among, you know, the fans of Tolkien's work, those bombed. Again, I enjoyed those as entertainment-wise. Relation to the book, terrible. But they're fun movies to watch for me. But with Rings of Power, again, I enjoyed it to an extent, and I liked that there was homages, and I can be fair in saying that there is accurate, at the least semi-accurate, roads leading up to things happening, but there's not many of that. There's not many of those, I should say. In the sense, like, the Rings of Power being made. That's it's an important instance in the Lord of the Rings lore and how that all happens. And it's semi-accurate in the sense of, you know, how Sauron, in whatever form he took, got to the elves and all that stuff, and how the rings were created. It's pretty good. I mean, they made it more tellable, does that make sense? Better for storytelling in film and TV than it would have been exactly from the book, because again, book readers would have, like I said, they would have known immediately that this was Sauron. So it made it easier to know. I mean, it made it easier for the average viewer. And again, this is for the average viewer, and they're doing it because they want to make money and they want to get the views. And if they did it for the Tolkien scholars and the experts, then the average Joe who's never seen The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit or never read anything from Tolkien, they're not going to know what the heck's going on. And it's going to be very content rich and very lore rich. And I remember Game of Thrones, first two seasons, I was always confused. And I had it on Blu-ray and the DVDs, and so I had the special features to explain the different houses. And seriously, like, I had to take mental notes because I was always confused. There's too many freaking names and houses and regions. But I can imagine that's how people feel about Lord of the Rings. At least when you read the books, you have maps and you have lineages. Like, I'm about to finish the Silmarillion right now, and going through that, and I'm like constantly looking at lineages and looking at the maps and seeing where everything's are. So it makes sense. They're trying to make it for the average Joe for Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power. So, with that being said, overall, Season 1, I definitely want to watch it again, and I definitely will watch it again. I don't know if it has replayability. You know, my favorite shows have replayability. Shows like Psych, that used to be in USA, that's my all-time favorite show ever. The Marvel Netflix shows are some of my favorite shows as well. Those are shows... The Office, that 70s show. I know those two are very different from the previous two. Maybe not Psych. Psych's a comedy. But they're all fantastic shows, and I can watch them over and over again. And even with the Marvel Netflix shows that are based on these comic books that I have more knowledge about, I'm still able to watch and thoroughly enjoy them. But Lord of the Rings, I'm a bigger fan than anything else. And so the stakes are higher, to say the least.